Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. This is the third in the MOTT MACDONALD PROSILIENCE series. This will be session 3, which will be covered DfMA and future mobility with Luai Kadir, Ben Carlisle and Andy Stevenson. If you could just let us know whether the audio is clear and you can hear us via the chat box, that would be great, just before we start. Okay, great. So I'm just going to hand you over to Luai now. He will be starting the session, followed by Ben and then by Andy. So we'll just get onto the presentation. Sorry. Luai, would you like to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Alexia. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, and happy Eid to all of you who's celebrating. This is the third session in our Prosilience series, and we're quite proud, and it's a great pleasure to be with you. My name is Luai Kadir. I'm the Middle East Development Director for MOTT MACDONALD, and accompanied today with Ben, who's gonna cover the design for manufacture and assembly, and Andy, who's gonna cover the future mobility part. As we started in this series, we put a couple of challenging questions for our sector, and basically whether we want to change the way we work in our sector, in this case the construction, and are we willing to embrace the digital transformation to improve our sector adaptation for digital going forward. But let me remind everybody of the term prosilience. That's the heading of our series. It has mainly two components, the proactivity and resilience, which in a simple way, it's providing resilience in a system through proactive mechanisms, such as analysis, analytics, simulation, etc. So for the series, we started the first one by covering the smart infrastructure and digital ventures. Then the second session covered the cybersecurity and and the new ways of working. And the third session today is DfMA and future mobility. I'm pleased to share with you that because of some requests from attendees, we are pleased to say that we are going to extend this series beyond the third session. However, it's going to take some time. So I would expect we would be back within a month's time with another 3 sessions related to prosilience and covering other topics. We started at the beginning of these sessions by looking at some of the global challenges our clients face, and specifically for our region. Yeah. Okay, just bear with me, it's loading slowly. Okay. So the challenges that we explored, the first one was our digital maturity in the sector. If you look at the top left in that diagram, the construction is basically the second from the bottom to agriculture and hunting. So it is really a long way to go. However, with the current circumstances, I think there is a great push for adaptation and move up the ladder. The second one we looked at was water availability and scarcity, especially in this part of the world. As you can see in the MENA region, it is one of the worst in the world. And that's why we need to be quite wise and resilient on how we not only plan and design, but also how we are gonna implement our projects related to water. But because of water is affecting all other sectors, this will affect different sectors as well. The third part, we looked at climate change and some of the unfortunate events that our region is facing, such as sporadic and flash flooding that we're facing, especially in the GCC, and how this will disrupt and drive us to change the way we design and make our infrastructure more resilient. Then we explored cybersecurity that was covered at length during session 2. And cybersecurity is not only from companies' point of view, but also individuals. And the last challenge was related to population concentration and capacity failures. Especially when you have a lot of people, they would like to move back to cities. And with this congestion comes a lot of issues, especially when systems do not work as planned. Then during the second session, we explored some of the opportunities in our industry. The first one, very briefly, DfMA, and as per the request, Ben is gonna drill deep in this topic. Digital maturity, we explored some of the digital solutions, such as rehearsals, the virtual reality, BIM, automation in design, etc. And also we explored smart infrastructure and the maturity at length during session number 1. Ultimately, this all falls in and assemble what we call the digital twin and the future of smart cities. So that will bring this reminder introduction to an end. I will hand over now to Ben Carlisle, who's gonna explore in-depth DfMA, design for manufacture and assembly. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Luai. So good afternoon, morning, wherever you might be listening from. I'm Ben Carlisle. I'm MOTT MacDonald's Global Practice Lead for DfMA. That's Design for Manufacture and Assembly. And I want to talk to you about how this approach can help make infrastructure more resilient, but also improve it for everyone. So the COVID-19 crisis is creating a temporary need for some types of social infrastructure, most notably healthcare around the world, at short notice, at large scale, and in many cases in whatever locations might be available. Additional capacity may also be needed to operate other infrastructure as we start sort of getting back to a new normal in a socially distant, safe manner. And all this needs to be delivered despite disruption to supply chains and the restrictions that social distancing might place on construction sites and construction workers. So any such capacity needs to be more flexible and more adaptable to changing circumstances, with the possibility of being repurposed when this crisis has passed and we're still left with the challenges that the way discussed earlier of population growth, of climate change, and so on. DfMA is an approach that can help provide this through modular building units that can be assembled quickly, easily, and repeatedly. Standardized designs and components mean that buildings and structures can be adapted, repurposed for rapid deployment, providing resilience in this crisis and future scenarios. So we think that infrastructure can really benefit from a more agile and flexible approach to how we plan, deliver, and repurpose our assets. MOTT MacDonald has, over the years, pioneered the application of rapid build technologies, most notably in the sports and events sectors, where large, complex structures might be required for large numbers of people, but in a short period of time and for a short period of time. The example on the left here is the Jakarta Velodrome for the 2018 Asian Games, which was delivered within half the budget normally available for such a facility. It made extensive use of modularized and standardized componentry, which were configured and deployed to suit the client and the event's specific needs, and has created a sort of world-class permanent venue. We also have extensive experience in the design and delivery of healthcare facilities and other social infrastructure around the world. So most recently, we're privileged to support the UK Health Service by combining these two areas of expertise to provide additional critical care capacity, both on permanent hospital sites as well as in this image here for the Surge Hospital programme, which provided thousands of additional beds in sports and event spaces across the UK. But we've also seen and applied similar approaches, the use of sort of modularised, standardised components to create more permanent assets, so schools in this example. Partnering with the UK Department for Education, we developed standard school designs suitable for off-site production, all produced digitally first before anything was fabricated or made. To ensure that these could be delivered to the scale and quality required, we had to adopt a more agile approach to delivery. Now, this meant working with the supply chain through a series of iterative and increasingly large frameworks to refine and improve designs, so learning from the supply chain as we go, as well as building capacity, capability, and trust within the supply chain to deliver in a fundamentally new way. The upshot is these frameworks have delivered better schools more quickly and with less disruption to pupils and neighbours alike. So most of the construction activity now takes place outside the school environment rather than inside. And we continue to improve designs and delivery today because we're building on what went before. And we may not be far from a place where a supply chain can produce elements of schools, so classrooms, for example, which could be shipped and installed to any one of a number of sites across the estate, depending on priority. This would clearly make our client and the estate more resilient, as it can respond more quickly and with higher certainty to unexpected events, for example, a fire or a bulge year within an education context. But none of these examples is possible without DfMA. So it's a combination of two design approaches, design for manufacture and design for assembly. And these respectively are making things easy to make and making them easy to put together. So this really introduces the focus of how something is made, as well as our traditional design function of how it functions in use. And DfMA enables better offsite construction, which is really just a method of making elements or assemblies away from their final location. And we're seeing a broader term, modern method of construction, introduced, which includes a wider range of activities. So traditional building systems or pre-manufactured bathroom pods, for example, or entire hotel rooms, all the way through to on-site automation of activities to improve productivity on the construction site. A key element of this is it must be collaborative because it needs the correct input from such a wide range of people across the supply chain, covering things like production, construction, logistics, as well as the client's requirements and design standards. And by adopting this approach, critically, we can break the cost, quality, time triangle relationship, which traditionally says that we can only improve two, but not all three of the measures. So why is design important? Well, I think these two graphics illustrate why. On the left, we see that although the cost of design is pretty low in the grand scheme of things, actually it has the largest influence on the total cost. So at a relatively early stage of a project, we're committing the majority of construction costs, and there's a limited amount that people who come afterwards can do. And on the right, the curve illustrates that changing later becomes harder and more expensive. Now, given that studies across the sector indicate that somewhere around a half of what's spent on construction ends up in the asset, and as much as 30% of what's spent could be waste, we really need to be targeting the earliest possible stages of a project using DfMA. Looking beyond health and education, we've seen these approach really paid dividends across the full spectrum of approach. So on the right-hand side, we've got the standardized designs I talked about for schools, all the way through to the left-hand side, which is a more sort of one-off approach. This specific example was for a major electricity substation in a busy area of London. And by adopting extensive DfMA throughout the delivery of this sort of complex tight site project, we managed to halve the program, and critically an electrical outage was reduced from 2 weeks to 2 days. Elsewhere, we've extended it to more of a platform approach, so developing a kit of parts using standard off-the-shelf, readily available elements from the supply chain, as well as more sort of bespoke but procured at scale for the 35,000 square metre Sydney fish market. And this approach was applied across the full area reinforced concrete basement, as well as the timber framed undulating roof. So I guess the approach is independent of sector and of material. Moving into the water sector, we've designed major wastewater treatment works using extensive DfMA, which reduced around 11,000 working site days, and also eliminated reportable health and safety incidents throughout the delivery. And because DfMA is as much a mindset as it is an approach, it's applicable to anything which is made, or in our case, built. So is it any wonder why interest in this area is burgeoning? But it's not just designers who are interested in DfMA. Governments and major asset owner clients around the world are variously committing future pipelines of work, making substantial investments into initiatives around productivity or research and development, and setting targets for DfMA and projects. So notable examples would be the Australian market, Dubai with 3D printing, for example, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the UK. In private finance circles, investment in the supply chain is also increasing pretty substantially in recent years. And picking an example of Katerra in the US has just topped $4 billion after raising significant funding earlier in the year. And looking further ahead, there's also increasing research into the benefits of DfMA and offsite manufacturing, which suggests that there will be further increases in investment and activity likely to follow. Now, DfMA may seem focused on the delivery phase, but we also see benefits and have seen benefits for asset owners as well as the end customer, us as a society. So asset owners benefit at a project, program and estate level through better value assets procured faster and smarter and delivered to higher standards. So for example, going back to the schools example, air tightness achievable with offsite production has increased by an order of magnitude over sort of progressive frameworks that we've worked on versus traditional methods, which has clearly great benefits for operational costs in terms of maintaining comfort levels inside the buildings. Hotel owners and developers, for example, could realize the value of land and investment far more quickly by getting assets built and operational in less time through greater use of DfMA and offsite manufacture. Finally, at the top level, society benefits. So we see reduced disruption because construction sites are active for a shorter period of time. We see benefits from better performing assets and from improved social benefits. And I'd like to dwell on this one just a little bit more. Since DfMA allows us to break the link between where an asset is and where it's made, we effectively can distribute activity at a local or a regional, national, or even a global level. So if we view a construction site as the last stage of a production line, we can reimagine supply chains. For example, setting up enterprise zones to enable clusters of manufacturing capability to grow in certain areas, but serve a far bigger region. This means that the money we spend or invest on an asset in one area or one city can provide stable employment to people in other locations without the need for daily or weekly travel between locations and all the stresses that can bring. That employment can then continue whilst the output creates similar assets in other locations. So with DfMA, I think we can proactively shape economies to provide additional resilience and greater equality, all just by changing our approach to design. So we're helping construction undergo an accelerating change from looking like traditional construction to looking like production. And this is really driven by, amongst other things, an increased focus on DfMA. This means that assets will be configured and deployed rather than constructed, and all construction will be digitally rehearsed and with reduced site working. We'll have greater certainty about the quality, cost, and program much earlier in the process. And new approaches to procurement are being developed to really allow this to happen. So buying from supply chains that will inevitably look very different from today's. And we'll start to blur the lines, I think, between capital and operational expenditure as plug and play, redeployable, reconfigurable infrastructure becomes more possible and more attractive. And as I've said, with these new approaches, we can shape economies just by changing the way we deliver. And we don't think it's that far away. I think we have all the elements. We just need to assemble them correctly. But critically, this can only be done on solid digital foundations. So that's me. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Andy.
Thank you, Ben. So my name is Andy Stevenson. I'm the transport sector leader for MOTT MACDONALD in the Middle East. Amongst other things, I look after aviation, ports, roads, bridges, rail and transit, and of course the subject topic of today around mobility or transport planning, if you like. I've got over 20 years experience, and the last 10 of those in the Middle East. But one of my particular passions is future mobility. I have to say this is one of the most exciting periods in my career, with this colliding of the digital and automobile age. I actually prepared this presentation before COVID-19, but some of the issues and findings of this presentation are all very relevant, and the tools and techniques that I'm going to walk you through to help you plan yourself through this extremely uncertain time, whether that be for future mobility or any of the other sectors that we've discussed on this Prosilience series, it will stand you in good stead. So wherever we look around us, we're finding claims and concerns that the world is increasingly getting out of control. Even more so in the last few months, I would say. But whether it's the business press, the media, just your personal conversations, we are witnessing an increasing feeling of uncertainty, turbulence, and change. The world has become unprecedentedly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what contributes to the world feeling out of control? Well, we could put COVID-19 front, right and centre here, but really this is about the digital age colliding with the motor age, whilst people's behaviours are also changing at the same time. And all of this is causing disruption, leading to this feeling of being out of control and this very uncomfortable feeling in many ways. But is it really any different to the past? Before we had the Black Death, we had world wars, we found out the world wasn't flat, or we weren't even at the centre of the universe. Plus now we've got technology of a complexity and capability that we've never seen before to help us deal with it. But is technology the answer to all of our prayers? In my mind, it can help, but it will not solve uncertainty. So really the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. And all of this has caused this massive and deep uncertainty about the road ahead and about how we go about tackling it. And nobody really knows the answer. We can't rely on our old methods to predict this uncertain future. They just will not work. So how do we deal with this uncertainty, and how do we move towards some kind of certainty? So our first thoughts on this was that this is probably all about being resilient and adding resilience to our decision making. But resilience to us is a negative term in that it implies negativity, that something's happened to you and then you bounce back. Then I saw this quote at the bottom of the slide here from somebody at PwC, which said resilience is about getting ahead of the change so that you can survive and thrive. And this is where we thought perhaps a better term for this is prosilient, or perhaps to have prosilience. So what is prosilience? Louis kindly started us off with a definition, but this actually exists in the dictionary, and it means outstanding, prominent, and the Latin version is to leap forth. It is used in other industries, psychology, IT, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. So if resilience is about how you respond to challenges, then prosilience is about how you intentionally prepare yourself to deal with them. It's not about being able to operate through disruption. It's about anticipating disruption and adapting to it before it even occurs. So essentially, as Louis said, it's a proactive version of resilience. So how do you become more prosilient? So at Mott MacDonald, we use foresighting, horizon scanning, and scenario planning. The world is changing, and it's changing significantly. Planning for the future by looking in the rearview mirror is no longer adequate in the face of the opportunities, threats, and uncertainties that we face. So, instead of the more traditional predict and provide approach, which all of the planners, engineers listening in will know very well, we actually need to move towards more of a vision-led approach. We need to move from predict and provide to decide and provide. So if predict and provide is forecasting most likely future and provide a means to accommodate projected demand, then decide and provide is decided on that preferred future and provide a means to move towards it that accommodates that deep uncertainty ahead. If we take the road building of the past, what we've done is we do traffic surveys, we growth the traffic surveys, and we decide how many cars are going to be there in the future. Of course, that's going to lead us to more, bigger, and better roads. But it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're always going to get the same answer. If you decide on a preferred future where you don't want to build more roads, there's a very different outcome when you move from demand-led supply to supply-led demand. All of this then calls for strong planning that is vision-led and which negotiates uncertainty, unlike some of the methods of the past, and it'll help you to achieve more resilient decision making. This calls for futures. Mott MacDonald, in collaboration with the University of West of England, have developed this futures toolkit. This is available to all, so you can all, there's a website at the end, you can go onto the website and you can start to use this yourself. It will help you to start navigate some of this uncertainty and help you become resilient. As I said before, it can be used for any sector. This is not just future mobility focused or transport focused. It can be a robust tool for any of the decisions that you're making going forward. So what exactly is futures? Well, basically, it's 6 stages, and it's packaged very nicely to make it look quite simple. It's not quite as simple as that as when you start to use it, but basically it's over 6 stages that we use for scenario planning, and we'll go into a little bit more depth on some of them, looking at a major master plan which had a future mobility focus that we undertook in Dubai using this toolbox. So stage 1, gearing up, is obviously about opening your mind and getting ready to engage. What we try to do is help you to understand the approach and the underlying philosophies around it. So on the recent master plan, we discussed connected and autonomous vehicles. We discussed the difference between autonomous and automated. We talked about electric vehicles and the need for charging infrastructure. We started talking about micromobility. We talked about elevated transit systems, and we discussed more other things like integrating metro with the development and the external connections. Most of all, really, we actually talked about how the future is very, very uncertain. And the path and how we were going to gear up to engage in this futures toolkit. Then we move to stage 2, which is the preferred futures and deciding where you want to get to. So this is very much about visioning, and in this stage we would ask you to pay particular attention to the centrality of the triple access system in really deciding on the future you want. The ability to access people, goods, services, opportunities that underpins economic prosperity and social well-being. Access is not only delivered by transport, but through land use, telecoms, and we believe your vision should reflect this. Just to give you an example, this is what came out of the visioning workshop summary. We made a very early decision on this because part of the master plan was already existing. We didn't actually want to build any more roads. This development is one of the best accessed in the city already, and just because we were looking at different land uses, increases in land uses, changes to the master plan, we had a very early decision that we didn't want to build any more infrastructure, and that includes roads and utilities. We were fortunate enough to have a metro next to the site on two sides, so transit-oriented development was very important to us. We wanted to promote innovative public transport. We wanted people to walk and cycle and use micro-mobility measures. We wanted to promote car clubs. We wanted to start looking at whether we could reduce parking standards, but also on the flip side, increase pick-up and drop-off, as we see many more people using shared transport, things like Careem and Uber. So you don't necessarily need to park anymore, but you certainly still need space to pick up and drop off. We're also fortunate enough to have marine connections. And the last one, we did really want to look at e-mobility. It was something that was very important to the client. So that's the kind of thing that comes out of the visioning workshop. Moving on to opening out. This really starts now to guide you through a scenario planning exercise to understand plausible future context faced by the strategy you developed based on your vision. So really, by exposing the extent of your uncertainty and then later addressing it, you're able to improve the robustness of your decision making going forward. This is where you will start to expose those uncertainties, and it'll feel very uncomfortable. But you can start to horizon scan and develop those plausible scenarios before you start looking at options. So the future scenarios we used on this particular master plan were quite diverse, but they were all plausible changes to society and lifestyle. So at the top there, we've got the technology unleashed. So what would that mean? You know, transport deregulation, rapid technological progress, and we thought it'd probably be private sector dominated. Down to the bottom left there, greener communities, people are less materialistic, social and environmental mobility considerations over technology and individual choice. And then on the flip side of that, the individual freedom, where the public demand freedom, they want their control over their transport, they want data privacy, and they want stronger data regulation. And of course, this already also sits around the trends unmodified if we continue to do exactly what we do at the moment. So quite diverse, plausible futures. But with all of them, they are possible and they are plausible. So they started to give us a good base to start testing this master plan. So then we move into stage 4, the options. So this is really looking at the how. You know, you've set your visit, you've set your vision, you've opened out some of the uncertainties. How can you achieve what you want to? So many of you will be familiar with the options generation. We'd look to develop a strong set of options that will set you on a direction of travel going forward to realise that vision. You can draw on global business to gather options of relevance from elsewhere. It can be benchmarking. And you can also start to develop your own options, mindful of their fit with the vision, and with a more developed understanding of the uncertainties and potential change ahead. Stage 5, this then helps you to examine those options individually and in combination and see how they might perform together in different futures. Do they align well across those scenarios in achieving the outcomes that you seek, or doesn't it work? Is alignment poor, and some of the scenarios place you at undue risk? There are options within here to look at policy option testing tool. We have that available as well. And this is kind of a means of enabling you and your stakeholders to identify options that you are most confident will address your vision and should therefore be included in your strategy. Communication is a key aspect of this stage and often includes what we call wind tunneling and testing your option against those preferred futures. So what do I mean by wind tunneling? So here's an example. As you can see, we've got essentially the vision that we developed in stage 2 down the left-hand side, and we've got those plausible futures we discussed across the top. And we're testing each of those visions and those options to see how they perform in those plausible futures. So when we have green, then that's positive and it goes well. Amber, we're kind of unsure, it may or may not, and red, it doesn't. Now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do them just because they're red. It's just that in that certain plausible future, it doesn't necessarily fit. We have to go back to the client vision. You know, we know we want to make it a desirable place. We want it to be car light. We want people to walk. We want to use existing infrastructure and the opportunities that we've got around the metro in particular. So this is a very useful tool to see how those options match up against these various different futures. But as I said, you don't need to completely ignore any of them just because they perhaps don't meet that particular plausible future. It just means they can be used in a combination with others if it's something that you still want to pursue. So then stage 6 really is about putting in place regular monitoring and preparing to periodically review, particularly in today's times. It is important that you go and review this. You need to look at new evidence and signals of change. This may mean you rerun parts of it, you know, perhaps a lighter touch way, and it might be helpful for your stakeholders and staff and developers change over time. So this is a different approach to planning. This is vision led. It will make you feel uncomfortable, but by looking in your rear view mirror about what's happened in the past and trying to predict a future is no longer fit for the world that we live in, and there's better ways to be planning in the future. This is all about deciding on your future and then planning for it. It will make you Prosilient and allow you to plan for a Prosilient world. If you want to know more about it, then please use the website shown. As I said, it's free and available to use, and we'd be delighted to show you more. We've had some great successes using this so far. So please get in touch if you want to be Prosilient. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Luai now, and then hopefully we can take some questions.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Ben. I think we will have plenty of time, around 22-23 minutes till the top of the hour. So Alexia, over to you. If you can channel whatever questions have been raised, we'll be more than happy to address them.
Yep, so the first question comes from Istanto. He says, what if eventually the outbreak has been done and back to normal faster than our prediction? In fact, we have planned or construct, for example, sports facility to be a hospital. What are we going to do or to anticipate it? Thank you.
So I'll take that one, I think. So the whole approach to the Surge program has been to adapt spaces that haven't been able to be used during the pandemic. And so they were delivered generally within around 1 to 2 weeks, and they were designed to be modular and easy to put together, and they are consequently relatively easy to take apart and to reuse those parts in other facilities if we need to. So I think in this specific example, the facilities are relatively easy to turn back to their original function because we're using large open events halls or the pitch underneath a covered roof within a stadium, for example. So in these specific examples, it's relatively easy to convert the spaces back again. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that was, he's basically asking how to then convert a facility back from what it's been changed into back into, for example, a sports facility. We've not had so many questions today. I think there's still still coming in. So far, we've only had the one from Ms. Santo. Just anyone listening, please make sure you add in the questions into the Q&A box. If you've got any questions for the speakers, they can answer them for you here and now. So if anyone has any additional questions, please make sure to put them in the chat box. Yes, Jason, we will be providing the presentation via email. You'll also get a video recording of this presentation as well. Atif asks, how can you align your vision to the post-COVID-19 era?
Okay, I'll have a go at this one. It's a great question actually, and one we've been thinking about for certainly the last 3 months. We actually did a session on this, and what we looked at was essentially the middle distance. So trying to think about the things that you know and the things that you don't know. So again, exposing those uncertainties and then breaking that again down into scenarios. And you can do it easily with COVID-19, depending on which recovery scenario you think most likely. You can still start to plan your future. So we actually kind of use this futures toolkit both for our clients, also for our own business. But again, looking at those range of scenarios that are all plausible, and then making plans. And again, if you start to use some of that wind tunneling I talked about, you will get to a much better answer at the end of it. Remember, there's not much that you can use from the past to predict what's going to happen post-COVID. You have to look at a new way, and you have to remember what your vision was in the first place and still be trying to get to that. Now, it might be that you go back and have a look at that vision and say, well, actually, with this uncertainty, particularly, for example, in the aviation world at the moment, you go back, you expose that uncertainty about what's going to happen, but you can still look at plausible scenarios going forward. So it's the same technique, just applied slightly differently, and probably to a slightly shorter time frame than you would normally. So as I said, we called this the middle distance. We did have a workshop that we held with some of our clients around this, and we actually split it up into that shorter time frame, and then we expanded it out to make sure that we weren't missing something in the future and about what our vision was, post COVID-19, if you like. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. If I can add just a couple of things to your answer. The first one is, obviously, it depends a lot on the sector. So some sectors, they are more, let's say, protective during this time compared to the others. However, they all have now a common question is, do you need that asset? Do you need that project? Whether it's a transport project, it's water, etc. So it goes down to critical assets that can generate revenue, assets that can distribute the wealth and the social impact, as Ben highlighted earlier on the DfMA, how you distribute the economic activities to a larger pool of residents and locals. So that will distribute obviously the wealth and obviously the revenue. The other thing is planning at this point. It has to be short to medium term rather than the long term that we're used to. So at any business, everybody needs to really look at their business model, their immediate plan, quarter by quarter, and adjust accordingly. And I would repeat, ask the fundamental question, whether this project is an absolute need to this client, to the city, or not. And the last comment is you cannot address only sector specific without looking at others. So there is an interdependence between sectors now more than ever. So you might see a solution that was focused on a national infrastructure for a specific sector. This has to be coordinated and integrated with other sectors for the better outcome, not only for the city, but for the people living in the city.
Yeah, I think probably just the last thing to add there, Louay, is of course you shouldn't ever lose that long-term vision. This is about taking small steps to deal with you know, a relatively short period in time. I think everybody hopes, but it is worth going back and testing if that vision is still relevant before you get into looking at short-term measures.
Okay, so we've had quite a few more questions come in. So Mohammed asks how railway projects are planning. Sorry, how many railways planning do you have for new projects in Saudi, or if you're working with any railway projects in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I'll pick that up, but it's a difficult one to answer because we're obviously under certain confidentiality agreements. But safe to say we are looking at rail planning in Saudi right at the moment.
Ibrahim asks, Ibrahim asks, can you elaborate design/assembly techniques to be used for modular?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a wide range of approaches. So at one end of the spectrum, we can have a sort of fully finished, you know, all the walls painted and all the electrical fixtures and fittings in place in a factory, and then those modules get shipped out to site and assembled. And at the other end, we can have sort of panelized or individual components that are made elsewhere and then assembled on site. And depending on which approach you take, you will approach the design slightly differently. But the main sort of theme is really starting with the end in mind and then working backwards. So you start with your sort of finished asset, your vision of the finished asset, I suppose, and then you work back and decompose it back through the stages of construction. So you start with how does it actually go together on site? What is the biggest thing that you can get to site from wherever it's made? So your logistics become a major driver for how you actually modularize an asset. And then you work back through how you actually move it, how you lift it, what the temporary conditions are going to be, as well as then figuring out how you manufacture and make each individual component in the most sort of reliable and productive and cost-effective way. And generally that is a feedback loop, and it needs to go all the way through that loop iteratively throughout the design process, and also iterate between different disciplines. So there's no point a structural system being designed fully modular when the MEP or servicing, for example, can't accommodate that approach. So hopefully that answers the question. It's quite a big question.
Mohammed asks,
yeah. Can I add just before we jump to the next one? I think there's a fundamental also piece to that question is in the GCC. it's quite clear that we need to address the mix of the labor force we have. So there is a good part, more than 50%, they are unskilled labor, and it's unlike other places in the world. That's why you see the productivity is less. Now, going forward, if we want to adopt all these digital solutions, efficiencies, manufacturing, redistribution of wealth, economic wealth to more people, the skilled labor force need to be increased. Now, when you start doing that, so systems from one side, then you have the right people who can use these systems, deliver, starting from design all the way to manufacturing and assembling. This will drive more economic value to the market, and obviously you can do more for less people, and hence the productivity and the production and ultimately the GDP of the country will increase by this change. So I think we are in a transition, and I do call for all governments to push more with the skilled labor demographics change, rather than keeping the same labor force and try to upskill them. That's going to take far a long time, and the impact will be limited.
Mohammed asks, Andy, do you think if we were adopting supply decide demand, would it be easier to survive such a pandemic?
So, sorry, can you just repeat that? I didn't quite catch it.
He said, do you think if we were adopting supply decide demand, would it be easy to survive such a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, this pandemic is pretty interesting. I think the answer probably lies probably somewhere in the middle. Actually, I don't think you can be on the demand or the supply side completely. They are behaving to use transport in the future. I think if we, as I said before, if we start looking back and trying to predict what might happen,
I think, Andy, you're breaking.
I think Andy's screen may have gone out.
Yeah.
He will be coming now. So
no worries. Yeah, there was a question from Patrick, Alexia. Unfortunately, he took it out, but it would be. I'll be more than happy to answer.
The question is here. We've just used name node.
Yeah, it was about consultants and architects' adaptation to DfMA, if I recall it.
Yes. I can read up. So Patrick asks, he said he's the CEO of Offsite Engineering Solutions. We're a specialist sub-consultants for modular construction based in Dubai. My question is, how do we get the DfMA message across to architects and engineers early enough in the design cycle site efficiencies to be?
Yes, I can take that. And hi, Patrick. We used to work together quite some years ago. As you can see, as MOTT MacDonald, we were already there. So whenever clients, they're willing to take that journey and adapt to their projects, we are implementing it, and that's across different sectors. Now, you find some maturity in the built environment, like healthcare, they are more receptive. Hotels, they are more receptive. However, when you go to utilities, they are less receptive, such as water, power, etc. Now, with the current situation, I think everybody started looking how we can use these methods that are already existing for a better outcome and better efficiency. So I do believe a good amount of architects, engineers, they are convinced and they are using this methodology, but it needs also the supply chain, it needs the clients, the end clients, to see that value and their interest to drive that efficiency and implementation. Ben, do you want to add anything from your side?
Just a few things. It's a great question and a sort of a big challenge, I think.
No, I think Ben's struggling for connection at the moment.
Am I?
Ben, I can hear you clearly, I think.
Yeah, Ben, carry on. Carry on, it's fine.
Okay.
We can hear you.
So I think there's two sort of approaches, two generic approaches. One is the supply-led, where we pick it up in a project and we try and deliver it as best as we can, and that happens. But it's highly dependent on individuals and on the sort of method of procurement allowing market engagement early enough. It's particularly in sort of traditional design then build contracts. Where it's most successful is where it's sort of demand led, and I think it comes into sort of Andy's piece about having a vision led approach. So the clients that are most successful in doing it, either asset owners or sort of public private partnership type arrangements, where they have a clear view that driving this approach delivers value, then they're far more successful, and the higher level it is within that organization, the more successful it is. So that, you know, moving from just project to project is rarely highly successful. If we can get to a program level, or even better to an estate level, then we have higher levels of success. I think there's a number of other things that are woven into it. Digital is one, digital maturity is one, but also probably understanding of value and being able to clearly articulate what is valuable for a specific project or for a specific program is not something that is always very easy to do. But we do see in some areas, actually some of the utility projects, the water example I gave earlier, or the sports facility example I gave earlier, there's a very tight feedback loop in terms of what's spent and when the asset's delivered and how well it performs and the value it adds to that client. And where we have that tight feedback loop, then DfMA makes a lot more sense, because you can realize the value of a little bit more upfront investment in design and exploration much more quickly, sort of during the period of the project. Whereas in other slower burn type infrastructure, transport's probably one, it can be a little bit harder. But yeah, great question. I think I would very simply, I'd answer it as client driven is always more successful.
I think we've only got time for a couple more questions now. So Sarah asks, can we say that we can prepare ourselves to deal with sudden circumstances like COVID through building/creating a model to deal with in the future?
Yeah, I can take that. I think the fundamental question is, do we have enough information that we can build a system or a model that is resilient and can be changed with minimum impact on the service and on the people at the end? The answer is, to a certain extent, is yes. So we need to adopt more system oriented solutions with enough flexibility in that system, so that we can look at these scenarios. Ultimately, the scenario that we're living in, maybe it's an extreme. However, we have now some extremes and we can look at them. Then once we plan these, we need to come back and say the probability of this happening is a certain amount. And then it goes back to what Ben mentioned. It goes down to the client. If the client whether it's private, government, etc., they are willing to take that extreme, then by all means, this can be designed. Now, the big question then comes, do they want to pay for that design, which is very solid, very robust, because this might cost them more money because you're considering more severe conditions. So theoretically, it can happen. However, you need to balance between the value that you're going to get, the probability, and obviously the economic outcome of such solution.
Thank you. And then final question for today. How would new technologies, including AI, affect automation, productivity, and efficiency?
I go at that one. I think as Andy said, I think technology has a hugely important role to play. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing such massive change within our industry now and not sort of 20 years ago, because I think it's not that the technology to do what we need to do in terms of automation, for example, hasn't necessarily been there. It's just we haven't been organized as an industry and had our information digitalized in a way that allows us to apply these technologies before sort of the last five years, I suppose, 5-10 years. So I think they will have a massive effect. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of how fragmented the industry is before we can really get sort of systemic benefits from it. But certainly in terms of capturing information about site, about sharing and tracking progress of construction and assurance, and sort of reducing risk through that progressive assurance, I think it's already making a big difference and reducing waste, because we can identify things that are going to go wrong before they go wrong, as opposed to waiting for them to go wrong and then spending more money fixing them. So I think they will have a huge effect. It's just we need to get our digital house in order, and we've seen we see across Mott MacDonald massive benefits in adopting BIM, for example, and particularly including more richness of data alongside graphical information that we can use in ways that we frankly hadn't thought of 5 years ago. So massively, I think. Louay, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Thank you, everyone. I think that's all we have time for in terms of questions. We can provide questions if you send them in the chat box. We can always share them with Louay, Ben, and Andy to answer after the webinar via text format. Thank you for bearing with us today with any small technical issues that we had. And I'll just pass you over to Louay again as well. And thank you so much for today. Thank you again, Louay, Ben, and Andy as well for tuning in and giving the presentation. Again, we'll be and the presentation with you in the coming days. And Louay, I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to also thank Ben and Andy for their presentation, and everybody who was able to make it. I know that this is the Eid week, and I'm sure many they either on leave or they had other obligations. So thank you for attending the call. As I mentioned earlier, we're delighted to extend these calls beyond. I think the organizers will get in touch with you guys during June to have another series of presentations that they're aligned with Prosilience, but we're addressing different topics. So thank you very much. Keep safe and have a good day.